Hey everybody, this is Kevin Shabar Smith. It is so good to have you here. I can't wait to spend some time together. Glad you're checking out this video. So, for some of you, this is a pretty exciting time. You're getting ready to go out there in the quote unquote real world and come face to face with your employer and get your careers underway. So, for those of you who are in that position, congratulations. We're going to give you some great tips today to fit in really well in your new place of employment. For those of you who may be watching this and you're a few years off, uh, don't think that this doesn't apply to you, because it absolutely 100% does. This is a great time for you because now you get to practice. Practice how you interact with people of different generations, of different ages, how you can get some valuable insight, how you can put your interactions with them to work when it comes time for you to enter that new place of employment. So today we are going to talk about how to impress your new employer, even if you're generations apart from one another. And this is called how to impress your employer, but it really is about how to become the best version of your employee self that you possibly can be when you know you're going to be in an environment with people of different ages from different generations. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and flip over to my screen here. You are still going to see me up here in the upper corner. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Kevin Shabar Smith. Like I said, I am a human capital strategist. For those of you who have no idea what a human capital strategist is, I help organizations and leaders in organizations better invest in their people, how to hire the right people, how to keep the right people, and how to develop the right people as they grow into the organization. So that's what I do. And I'm here to talk to you kind of on their behalf. Like, how do you come into the organization ready to grow and ready to do well? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Some of the things I want you to think about as we talk is, what are the benefits? Why is it a good thing that we have people of different generations in the organization? I mean, what would it be like if everybody in the organization was just like us? What would it be in my business, right? I have a consulting business. What would it be if everyone that I brought on board to work on projects with me, or all the people that I worked with, were exactly the same? It'd be a nightmare. It'd be a nightmare. We need a diverse, well-rounded group of people, a team of people to really get the most out of our organizations. And so when you enter an organization, right, as part of the workforce that has a diverse set of people, you're going to be better off for it. Right? That's why it's such a good thing to have different generations in the workforce. We're going to talk about that a lot. What is it that other generations know that you don't? Right? There's a lot. There's a lot. And there's things that you know that other generations don't. And when you put those two things together, great things can happen. It's just when we go about doing that the wrong way that not so good things can happen. All right? So we have to understand, what is it that the people who are already in the workforce, that have been in the workforce, that have been going to work every single day, what is it that they value? And what is it that you value as an employee that you can bring to the table, so you can combine all of these things together and really rock and roll once you get in there? Okay? It's important to know why people think the way they do. Why do people of a certain generation think different than people of your generation? Why is it that people of generations that came before me, why do they think the way they do? Right? It's not just because of age. Right? I know some of you who are hearing my voice right now are thinking, well, it's because they're old. It's because they're older. That's why they think different. Not so fast. There's certain reasons why people think the way they do. And the more that we know that, the better we can immerse ourselves into an organization and work well with other people. All right? At the end of the day, all of this impacts our quote unquote work ethic, right? Some people have a belief that the younger generations lack a work ethic. And I would suggest, right, as you probably would too, that it's not a matter of work ethic being more or less of a work ethic, but definitely different. And it's those differences that we're going to talk about today. So, are you ready to go? Because I know that I am. All right, let's go. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about these different generations that exist inside the workforce. This is an amazing time because really, if you think about it, we could have up to five different generations of people in a current workforce. When you go and get a job and you go to work for the first day, imagine yourself walking through the door, walking through the hallways, right? Maybe going out on the shop floor if it's a manufacturing facility, or maybe walking down the halls of the office if it's an office building. You really could see five different generations of people. Right? And the more that you can get along with and interact with and provide value to all of these different generations, the better off you're going to be throughout your entire career. So let's talk about these. Let's talk about the differences between them, why it is that they think the way they do, and then we'll talk about what you can do to make sure that your transition into the workforce is a successful one. And if you're not quite ready to get into the workforce, how you can start practicing how you interact with these generations. So by the time you get there, you're all set. So let's talk about the maturists. Right? The maturists are also known as the traditionalists. Now they're typically born before 1945, and some of you are thinking, Kevin, there's not going to be somebody of that age in the workforce. And I'm here to tell you that when I was working in my first career job years ago, the owner of the business that I worked for went to work every single day until he was about 90, 93 years old. Okay? And so you definitely have an opportunity to work with someone from this generation, right? And people from this generation are known as the silent generation. Now, why are they known as a silent generation? Because back when this generation of people were coming up, right? When they were growing up, it was one of those generations where you spoke when you're spoken to, right? You respected other people in the workplace. You didn't talk out of line, right? It was a real hierarchical type society, right? It was really kind of formal, and you just didn't talk out of turn. Okay, so what shaped their worldview? What shaped their beliefs? What did they go through to make them have some of the beliefs that they have? Well, for one, this was back when some of the people in this generation experienced the Korean War, some the Great Depression. Right, the employer that I was talking about, who was 90 some years old before he stopped coming to work and decided to enjoy himself for a while. They went through the Great Depression, right? And you can only imagine what going through a period of time where literally there was not enough money or food to go around, right? Where the economy was in collapse, right? What that does to an individual and how they see life and what they get used to, right? Social Security, Social Security started to become a thought in this time frame. Right? Now we kind of take it for granted that when we retire, there's going to be some help there. But back then there wasn't that guarantee until those things were put into place. So war shaped this generation. Being drafted shaped this generation. Today, our military is volunteer, right? But there was a time in history when you got drafted, okay? The Great Depression, as I said, industry coming to life. All of these things defined this generation. So, so what values, right? And by values, what we mean is what are those things that we feel really deeply about, right? And so, people in this generation, they believed in sacrificing, right? Sacrificing for the greater good. The Great Depression meant that we had to give up some things. And that's just the way it was. And you didn't complain about it and you didn't bellyache about it. You just did it because sacrifice was part of that era, right? Things were traditional, right? You sat at the dinner table and you had dinner and you did your chores and you did work and everything was very structured, right? It was simple, right? But it was structured. People were patriots and had a respect for history, right? And the thing about work is, in this generation, people were loyal in terms of the workforce to the employers and to others, right? There was a loyalty. You did not leave your employer. People held jobs in the same place forever, right? And when it came to like jobs and promotions and pay raises and things like that, you got them as a result of staying with the company longer and longer and longer. Okay, so it's a little bit different than what we normally think about today, but this generation of folks are still around and they're still in the businesses. And so you want to make sure that when you're interacting with them, you can kind of understand where they're coming from because their values and their beliefs were shaped by a different era. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, so let's talk about the next generation, the baby boomers, right? The baby boomers. And this is from 1945 to 1963. I know like my big head's in the way of you saying the 63, but this is 45 to 63, the baby boomers. Now, the baby boomer generation had a whole different set of events that shaped their world. Okay, this is an era of time when the Vietnam War, right, was going on, where people started to get socially conscious, where people started to protest publicly against things that they didn't believe in. Right, this is for those of you who may have heard about Woodstock. This is a music festival that was a protest against Vietnam War, and just people were more vocal. Remember, in the previous generation, it was shh, right? Do what you're told, hierarchical approach to family. In this generation, I guess the word that the newer generation would use to describe these folks would be woke, right? But these folks were really woke, right? This is some people might call them the hippie generation, the true hippie generation, right? But these are the baby boomers, right? Television, right? This earth wasn't created with television. Right? The television was invented in this area and became like a focal point of the family. Right? People didn't watch nearly as much television as they did now, but it was an era where people gathered around, right, and started and watched like the nightly news together as a family. Right? So you can see kind of how their experience led to their values. Right? They were a very politically oriented generation. They had the assassination of John F. Kennedy, of Robert Kennedy, of Martin Luther King. Right? They had the Vietnam War. So all of these things were happening, and it shaped their values. Right? Civil rights movement, women's rights movement. And so when you think about women's right, yeah, women were given the right to vote um, way before that in the early 1900s, but there were still a lot of rights that they didn't have in terms of the workforce and promotion and pay raises. And unfortunately, a lot of that is still going on now. But back then is when women's rights in the workplace were being fought for very, very hard. So if we think about the workplace, like think about the workplace. If you graduate and you go to school, or maybe you go right into the workforce, right, and your CEO or your business owner or your boss is a female, right, of this generation, you should think to yourself how fortunate it is for you to have that experience, because it wasn't always like that for females. Whoever that person is had to probably fight through some things to get there, right? And so understand how those people's worldviews shaped their values, right? This is a generation that started to believe more in fairness, right? In teamwork, personal growth, right? Personal gratification. This is, we started to move away from my loyalty is to the employer to, hey, I want to grow as a person as well. Okay, so this is the baby boomer generation. Then comes, now hold on a second, guys. I have to share this with you. All right, all eyes up here in the corner, right here. I'm going to share something and be very honest with you. The Generation X is probably the best generation ever to grace this great planet. I'm a little bit biased because this is my generation, right? Generation X, anyone who's born between 1964 and 1982, generally speaking. And by the way, all of these time frames where people were born, it's a generalization, right? So it's not really exact, but it's a generalization. You might jump on Hulu or Netflix and watch an episode of Friends. But my generation, my friends, are the ones who made Friends popular, right? And so that's Generation X. What shaped my generation? This is what I want you to start to think about. I want you to think of the baby boomer generation and why they were the way they were. A lot of it had to do with their parents, right? Their parents, who were the maturists or the traditionalists, gave birth to the baby boomer generation, right? They came home from, they came out of the Great Depression, and they gave birth to this entire new generation, right, of baby boomers. The baby boomer generation then, right, set the stage for us. So what was the baby boomer generation doing? They saw their parents struggling in this Great Depression. And so they went out and made sure that they grew and got good paying jobs, and they were able to save money, generally speaking, right? And so while they were doing that, what were we doing? What was my generation doing while we were growing up? Right? We were the generation that went home a lot of times to an empty house after school because our parents, plural, both male and female, were at work. The generations previous, typically, the male went to work, the female stayed at home, right? But as we started to break those normal traditions, right, that started to change, and both heads of the household started to go to work. And so I remember coming home. My father worked and my mother worked, and so when I got off of school, I would come home to an empty house. Right? They called us latchkey kids, right? Because when we would come home, the key would be hidden under the doormat or whatever, and we'd come home and we would be there by ourselves, and we kind of took care of ourselves until our parents came home from work, right? But we were the first generation, right, to really start to latch on to technology. Personal computers started to make their way into our world. Yes, believe it or not, when I was coming up through school, we didn't have computers until I was in maybe 10th grade, maybe 11th grade, and we finally got a computer lab. We didn't have computers. We saw the space shuttle tragedy happen when the first female astronaut was the first teacher astronaut was going up into space, and unfortunately a huge accident happened, and it was a large tragedy. People from my generation a lot of times see space launches now. That one just happened not too long ago. We see those now, and something inside makes us just a little bit nervous, right? Because we saw how badly these things can go wrong before. We saw an impeachment by Richard Nixon, the impeachment of Richard Nixon, a president, right? So we saw all these things. And as a result, right, my generation developed this independent mindset, right? Self-reliant, entrepreneur, entrepreneurial, right? Meaning a lot of us started thinking about starting our own businesses, right? Self-preservation, we got into cliques, right? Flexible, informal. We weren't all buttoned up. We didn't wear suits all the time anymore, right? We started to question the traditions. After all, we didn't always sit down for the evening dinner. We didn't always come home to one of our parents being home at the time. And so we started to see different breakdowns in what we thought were the traditional institutions, right? And we started to question things, right? We wanted to work not as our parents did, right? To make sure that the Great Depression never would affect them as badly as it did their parents, right? They lived to work, and they worked a lot, and they worked a lot. And even the first part of my generation did the same thing, but we worked so we could go out and live and have experiences, right? Our parents worked so they could stuff money away, right? My generation worked so we could go do things, right? Do things with our family, do things with our time, right? So you can start to see how that shift of values continued through the Generation X time frame. And then, oh Lord, let me tell you folks. Now, this Generation Y, we refer to them as the millennials, right? Because they started coming through at the turn of the century. Now, oh Lord, the millennials. These are probably your parents, right? For most of you watching these are probably your parents, which is hard for me to believe because it seems like just yesterday I was walking into businesses trying to teach them how to deal with people of this generation. We didn't know what to do, right? This was a vast change in the employee base and organizations. We didn't know what to do. Your parents were just not that far removed from sitting in the same seats that you're sitting in right now, and they were coming into the workforce, and employers were like, what do we do, right? Why was this so hard? Technology had changed so much, and the way that information could get to these people changed so much in every aspect of life. Every aspect of life. Global warming or climate change, right, started to become a factor that more and more people started to educate themselves about one way or the other. Everything was connected. The internet made things so quick, either to give information to other people or to collect information back. We had Facebook. Like, this was the only generation who didn't know life without social media, right? Never really experienced life without social media. It had always been around, right? This was a generation who first got phones, like iPhones, right? This was the connected generation, right? They saw the first African American president of the United States, right? A rise in natural disasters and, unfortunately, 9/11, right? But the values of the Gen X, and these are in some cases your parents, right? It depends on which, what year they fall into. But they wanted a lot of progress in the workplace, without experience, because they can learn so much faster, right? They can learn so much faster because information traveled through the internet a whole lot faster. And so one of the problems that they had when they were first going into the workforce is they would say something like, hey, I've learned everything that so and so knows. Who cares if that person has been there 10 years longer than me? I know what that person knows. Why don't I get the raise? Why don't I get the promotion? Why don't I, And so they wanted that. They were ambitious to get to the next step. But what they didn't have was the experience that all those people had, right? And it took a while for that generation to settle in and realize, yes, everything moves faster now, but experience is still golden, right? And I want you guys to remember that too. Nothing beats experience. Right? Nothing beats experience. So grab yourself as much experience in different things as you can, right? So another thing that's very, very prevalent in this generation, the Generation X's, or I'm sorry, the millennials, is things get a lot more informal, right? We're lifting the veil off all the formalities, right? The millennials are less formal. Your parents are less formal than the generation before them, right? Short attention spans. Why? This was the first internet generation, the first social media generation. Listen, if you're having a conversation with one of your friends, right? Because this applies to you too, not just Generation X, not just, or Generation Y, not just the millennials. If you're having a conversation and I say, you know, I just can't remember who played, let me think of a good one. I just can't remember who played Ross in Friends, right? In the TV show Friends. And you're like, oh, I can't think of it either. What do? You Google it, right? In my generation, it was just like, huh, yeah, well, maybe we'll think of it someday. Next time I see the show, I'll remember to, look at it in the credits. Like you just couldn't get the information that fast, right? Now all the information is right at your fingertips, and when it isn't, we get frustrated. The millennials get frustrated because, right, the information's not there. Now, what does this mean for the workplace? Well, in the workplace, if someone else tells you to do something and you say why, and they say, oh, I don't have time to just do it, that is like a shock to the system. Because now you can't Google it and find out. You just have to wait and be patient. And with the Generation Xers, that was kind of a stumbling block, right? They're more financially savvy and socially aware, right? Way more socially aware than the previous generations were. Achievement, win-win outcomes. They cared about achieving together, right? My generation, Generation X, we are focused on us. Let's climb this ladder. Let's stick in our clicks, and let's move through this thing. Right now, we're like more community. Let's all win. Let's create a win-win, and let's move forward. We become in this generation, the millennials, Generation Y, more culturally and racially tolerant and accepting. Understand that back in the earlier generations, segregation and racial tension and racism prevalent, right? Prevalent. As each generation has progressed, we've become more culturally and racially tolerant. The reason why we struggle and we're having some of the issues that we have today is because there's always leftover belief systems from previous generations, right? And worldviews, right? That just linger around. And so every generation we see this change a bit. Now, this, my friends, if you're watching this, still, this is you, right? You're Generation Z. This is you. Let's talk about you. If you were born in 1910, way back over until 1994, this is you. Now, what are we going to do with you in the workforce? Because right when we thought that people were becoming more and more entitled, and I put that in quotes because it was perception, not necessarily a reality. Just when we thought that people wanted to climb the ladder without putting in the work, and experience, here comes your generation who's kind of putting the brakes on things, right? Some of you remember the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, right? And that shaped some of your experience. Maybe you've seen parents being laid off during that time, right? That shaped some of your experience. We're seeing in your generation, just like the millennials is when we started to see like 24-year-old millionaires, right? 25-year-old millionaires. Look at the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, right? That's what we started to see. And now we're still seeing some of that in your generation as well. We're starting things like cloud computing. Like I was talking to my mom not too long ago, talking about the cloud. It was just, right? What's this cloud? You mean a cloud? How do they store data in a cloud? Not that cloud, Mom. It's a metaphor. It's a name. Oh, well, where's it located? It's located everywhere. There's a little bit piece of information. What? It was just a mess, right? Trying to explain what the the cloud is. Crowdsourcing, like GoFundMe. Like there were no mechanisms prior to your generation where you could put forth an issue or an idea, and sometimes even a business, and have, instead of having all the power be in a bank and you having to go to a bank to get loans, you can get crowdsourced by hundreds of other people who believed in what you're putting out there, both on the social and in the business areas, right? That's your generation that's doing that, right? And the millennials that were doing that, right? Think about emojis. Like when phones first came out, there was no emojis. It was just text, and it was difficult to do that even, right? So I remember when people stopped writing letters and started writing emails, right? And people were like, I hate emails. Why can't you just write me a letter? It's so much more personal, right? Then people stopped emails, started calling all the time because they had cell phones they could take with them all the time. Then people stopped calling people on their cell phones and started texting them. And I thought that was it. We can't get any more direct and to the point than that. I mean, my phone rings. I'm like, who in the world would be calling me? Everyone just texts us, right? Until emojis came along, and now you can have whole conversations. You don't even have to text. I see my kids having conversation with friends, and it's just like a bunch of pictures. I'm like, how did you get that out of this, right? And so it's just different. It's another evolution in the generations. Right? Now, kudos to you, to all of you, right? To you who are watching this, right? And the millennials who kind of paved the way for this generation of folks. That's you, right? The most racially and ethnically diverse generation we have seen yet. Right? The best educated generation we have seen yet. In other words, less people are dropping out of school and more people are going into trade schools, 2 years colleges, and 4-year universities than ever before, right? And we're on that trend. Similar social views you guys are starting to develop to the previous generation. Social changes, and for most of the people in your generation, social change is seen as a good thing, right? In prior generations, it's a struggle, it's a fight. Like nobody wants to change, and although you can look around the landscape of the world today and see a lot of division, generally speaking, the people of your age are up for social change. Right? Social media isn't this thing that's extra. In my generation, we had life, and then, oh yeah, we also have this thing called social media, right? Nowadays, social media is ingrained in every part of the life. Every part of life. It's not something that's separate. Right? Everything is connected. Everything's connected. And so you're going to find out when you go into some employers, depending on how fast moving or slow the company is in terms of innovation, you're going to see things that aren't that fast moving, that aren't connected. And the question is, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle yourself? All right. So I would like to talk about some things that you're going to see. But we're going to talk about 5 things that I want you to consider. Right? Because the workforce that you are going to walk into, right, is full of maturists, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and you guys. So how do you get along? We've talked about the differences between all of these, right? And why did I take the time to kind of go through all of these? So you can understand that there's a reason why people are different, and there's a reason why everyone brings something valuable to the table, right? Their worldview, their history, their experience is all valuable and explains a lot about people, right? It's so good to have that, but we have to make it work. And so this is your workforce. So When you are working with other people, right, I want you to ask yourself, as you're speaking to someone who you just might not understand why they are the way they are, right? Maybe you have a boss and you don't understand why the boss isn't letting you do this or why the boss is demanding this. I want you to think about what has possibly shaped that person's perspective. Right? What is it that they value? Right? What is that person, because of the generation that they're in, what does that person value? Right? And how do you know? Have you spoken to them? Have you observed it? Right? We don't. The biggest mistake that you can make is just chalking it up to, oh, they're old, they don't know anything. It's a wrong thing to do, and I hope that you don't do that. So, I want to talk about five things. Three things to ask yourself every single day when you get to your workplace. Two things to remember every day, and one sure way to guarantee growth. All right, three things to ask yourself. Have you added value? Have you added value to others you engage with in the workplace? Even if it's small, how have you added value? Have you helped someone else reach their goal? Have you helped someone else reach their goal? Have you asked more questions than you've made statements? I call this the question to statement ratio. Right? A lot of people come into the workplace and do a lot of this, right? And not a lot of asking questions. Right? We can't learn and speak at the same time. Right? We learn by listening and asking questions. Right? Listening and asking questions. The more you do that, the more you will learn, and the better you're going to infuse yourself and become a more productive part of the workforce. Now, two things I want you to remember. Right? If you buy into the person first, the connection is going to become clear. Right? Get to know people on a personal level, not personal as an outside of business, but understand them as a person, right? With a different history than you, a different perspective as you, and try to understand where that comes from, right? Once you do that, you'll be better able to make a connection and understand why that person is telling you to do things that they're telling you to do in the way that they're telling you to do them. Okay? Second, if you help people get what they want, eventually you will get what you want. Right? I think this was Zig Ziglar, who's a famous salesperson, said this a long, long time ago. He said, if you help people get what they want, you will always get what you want. Okay? That's how you get what you want, by helping others. It seems kind of backwards, right? Especially to people of a younger generation. It seems kind of backwards. But I promise you, if you remember this, remember it every day. Right? If you first help people get what they want, eventually you're going to get what you want. All right? Remember that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is avoiding mental barriers. Right? And there's a small typo in here I didn't fix, right? So it should say avoid the mental barriers to growth. Assumption, arrogance, and indifference. Those are the barriers, and you want to avoid them. Right? Assumptions. If you find yourself saying, I already know that, right? You might be making an assumption. Right? Avoid that. Avoid thinking, I already know. Yeah, I already know that. If you find yourself saying, I don't need to know that. Right? If someone's trying to teach you something, and you find yourself going, I don't need to know that. Right? You want to catch yourself, right? And undo that. And finally, indifference. I don't care if I know or not. Right? I don't care to know that. Has nothing to do with me. I don't care. Right? So assumption, arrogance, indifference. Avoid those. Those are all barriers. All barriers that you guys can control. All right? So ask yourself these three things every day. Remember those two things every day, and avoid the barriers to growth. Avoid the barriers to growth. All right, so listen. I want to just say this, and I want to sum this up. And hold on, I'm going to see if I can put myself back up on the screen here for you guys. Okay, so I really want you to refocus here, okay? Because in a nutshell, here's the deal. You are one generation of people out of 5 different generations of people that are going to find yourselves in the workforce. Each generation, right, brings different baggage and different value, including yours. Every generation brings some really good things and some baggage that they've kind of brought along the way from the way that their generation has experienced life. There is no one generation better than the other. The key is to find out how to fit in with them. And the key to that is understanding them, right? Understanding their values, understanding why they are the way they are, right? And you do this just by remembering, right? Remembering certain principles, asking questions, and not assuming that we know everything, okay? You guys can do this. Your generation has what it takes to set this whole world in the right direction. Right? You do. You have what it takes. You are a special generation with special tools that former generations didn't have, with an inclusion mindset that other generations didn't have to this degree, a social awareness that other generations didn't have. Right? So you have a bunch going for you. All you have to do is figure out how to intertwine yourself with the other generations so you can take all of their experience and all of their value, right, and use it, right, to create a valuable whole and to make the business that you're going to be entering even better. Okay, so I hope you guys got something out of this. Good luck to you. I know you're going to do great. Stay focused, have fun, and I will talk to you soon.